you get a 100 on the revised, I guess, what would your official score be? I'm just trying to do the math. It's her math.
Leave her alone.
It's her math. Okay.
Yes?
So are we, like, for those who couldn't get page numbers, are we gonna be getting points off for not being page numbers even though we didn't have page numbers?
If you can just give me chapters, I'll be happy with that. If you could just give me chapter titles.
I'm saying like from the original, so are we're getting points off of our like original for not having a page number or chapter even though it didn't show up on the email.
You're talking about the original format?
Like our original paper.
Right. Well, I requested that people use page numbers on the original format. I did ask. So,
I use page numbers because I use a Gutenberg website.
use Gutenberg website page numbers. That,
I just use the chapter numbers because they just have pages.
right, but it does have chapters.
Yeah.
And what version do you use?
Ours didn't have chapters.
So I just use chapters.
Okay, so what version of Gutenberg do you use?
I don't know, the one that gets linked on campus.
Okay, well, that's weird.
Did you
Maybe
do
the
multi-page? Did you do multi-page?
Huh?
Did you do multi-page?
Gutenberg.
No, I did Gaskell. We did Gaskell.
My Gaskell. I use both on Google.
Because Mall Flanders
The whole plan
doesn't
doesn't
have.
have the chapters.
The Mall Flanders.
I think this may be a case of, again, platform issues. I think it's depending on what device you're using to access.
Because there was like on here, there's no chapters, but you have pages at least. But on the HTML, it's just this.
I have chapters and no pages.
Yeah, it's just.
This is why you need to do something that's not HTML. But anyway, so we've all learned something about technology. How awesome is that? But the key is, no matter what you used in the beginning, you're going to get 2/3 of your brand new grade revised. So it's going to go up, folks. Your grade will go up. That's the idea. All right. So what I may do is set up a discussion board on Canvas in the papers for people to kind of, we'll try to hack the problem of the e-copies and try to find a way that we can find a universal e-copy that everybody can access. Okay, but right now we have to talk about more dead people, so we begin. Okay, I'm going to start actually with the suffrage movement. Take a break from liberal and Tory politics. We'll get back to that before we get too much into the First World War. Okay. See if I can get, and yeah, don't freak out, this is all going to be in Spanish, but it's a silent movie, so it doesn't really matter.
Are the subtitles?
Not really subtitled so much as there's just a big yellow circle. So this is actual film of a suicide of a suffragette named Emily Wilding Davison. She had attended Oxford University, very well educated, and this is from her funeral cortege. Why did we're going to get to that part, why she ran out in front of a horse. I love how they keep showing it over and over again.
Well, I didn't even see it.
Oh, I missed it the first
I
time.
didn't even pay attention to what they were doing.
She's a very small figure. She jumps out, and she purposely jumps out. She waits for the king's horse. Just like the queen always runs a horse in the Derby, the Epsom Derby.
Well, I mean, it's nice for her to get the jockey.
horse had to be put down.
Oh my gosh. Did they go down?
No, you're not kidding. Really did. I think it did have to be put down, actually. Okay, we're more upset about the horse. That's a little scary, but okay. We should talk about that too. Was animal abuse. Okay, so what makes people so crazy that they commit suicide by, jumping in their equivalent? It'd be like one of you guys jumping in front of a horse in the Derby. And on, a national scale, knowing it's going to get media attention. Why would somebody do that?
I don't know, I've seen my college debt rates, so.
Do you think maybe she just gotten the bill from Oxford? I don't know, maybe that would be it.
One choice.
I take it you're going to be voting Bernie, right? Could be vote the Bern.
Feeling the bear.
But, another interesting thing too is though she did very well at Oxford and attended Oxford, not only could Emily Wiley Davidson not vote, but she could not obtain a degree at Oxford. Women weren't allowed, they were allowed to go, but they weren't allowed to have degrees. They got certificates saying, thanks for playing, which you couldn't really get a job with. So women's suffrage and men's suffrage is one of the key issues of the 19th century. And we touched on this a little bit last time when we talked about the emergence of mass politics. So the 1800s is about the emergence of mass politics, especially with Gladstone's Midlothian campaign. And starting in 1832, in the Great Reform Act, the middle classes get the vote. And they're going to dominate politics in the Victorian period. It's the middle classes, this is the class we associate probably most with the growth of the Liberal Party, which comes into being around 1840s, 1850s, and actually replaces what had been the party of opposition against the Tories, the Whigs. The Whigs go bye-bye, and the Liberals become the party of opposition. So this probably wouldn't have been possible without these voting reform acts that take place incrementally over the 19th century. So by the end of the 1800s, especially after some of the last voting reform acts in the 1860s, 70s, and 80s, increasingly working class men get the vote as well. So if the whole 19th century is about suffrage, the increasing of the right to vote, then why do women lag so far behind? And there are weird rules too. 1788, United States of America, women can stand for election, but they can't necessarily elect anyone, which is odd. You'll notice that, and again, these are places, I've limited it to the West here. Some of the Nordic countries are some of the first, even Australia, New Zealand, out in Empire and the Commonwealth. And yet, it is not until 1918 that the United Kingdom and Ireland get women's suffrage. So why does it take so long? And why do people do crazy things like try to kill themselves? Although it could be worse, and the reason they appear, does anybody know why Ireland and UK appear again in 1928?
Did it get repealed at some point?
It doesn't get repealed, it gets reformed, revised. And women finally, under the age of 30, get the vote. Because the first vote that was given to women right after the First World War, you had to be 30 years old to
Was
vote.
it Italy in 1945?
Yeah. And hey, not just Italy, check out 1944. France, home of the revolution. This is where, Olympe de Gouges and all those sorts of writing. This is also, of course, where Olympe de Gouges got her head cut off, so.
Yeah, right.
And it, yes, Liechtenstein, thank you.
But Portugal in 76.
That's not really that surprising.
But I'm very proud of Liechtenstein. I don't know about you guys.
Switzerland.
So
In
why?
70.
When did Switzerland even like become?
There are very weird reasons that, especially Western nations, particularly in France, hold off on the vote for so long. Part of it has to do with not necessarily the fact that the governments in the case of France were so conservative, but the governments in the case of France, especially in the latter half of the 19th century, they had universal male suffrage in 1848. They were afraid that women would vote conservative as a bloc. And so one of the reasons that they didn't give women the vote is because the Republic was afraid that women would bring conservative governments.
Right.
They were too busy. They were making watches. They were busy. They were really busy, and so they were banking. They were making watches. They were busy. Okay. They had some chocolate. They were all sitting around 1971, fixing watches, having chocolate, and realizing we forgot to give women the vote. In 1848, one of the key moments in suffrage overall for British people takes place, although in some ways it's kind of a non-starter. Those of you that are familiar with the painfully long and complicated 1848 lecture in my 105 know that a lot of stuff went on in 1848. In particular, it's the year of what? In Europe? Revolutions, yeah. Except for Great Britain. So how do they manage to avoid all of this?
Just don't rebel there.
It's not polite. It's not British to rebel. It's not British. It's just not done. Okay, folks? Well, and in part, I think that is, a viable answer. Because the definition of, yes, Mr. Luke?
Were they already, in the way that it wasn't British, were they looking at it kind of like, again, they already had one with the Glorious Revolution?
Right. Well, yes, in a sense, they already had their
Well,
revolution.
it didn't really work out very well for them when Cromwell did his thing either.
Everybody's bitter memories of Cromwell and the Commonwealth. In part, but I think it has more to do with what went on with Edmund Burke, remember? And the reactions to the French Revolution. The British model of liberty is not the American model. One of our terms was English liberty. English liberty is not based on the same things, the same abstract principles that American liberty is based on. They're certainly related, but they're not exactly the same. Because English liberty is based on that concept, because it's not really a document, it's a collection of documents and traditions and laws of what? The English, we have one, ours is real, ours is on a piece of paper. Constitution, yes. Theirs is whatever they say it is this week. And one of the things they say it is are things like the English Bill of Rights in 1689, good old Magna Carta. But you have to remember, Magna Carta wasn't a bunch of working class proletariat people rebelling against any government, really. It was barons. So the idea of English liberty, who gets represented, it's very different. And it's very embedded in the concept of property. And that includes Parliament, certainly the House of Lords, and even to an extent the House of Commons, which begins largely as part of the gentry. So in 1848, when every other European power, based on the kind of leftover principles of the French Revolution, were having their revolutions and overthrowing their authoritarian kings, the British had their kind of milder version. And that was the Chartists. The Chartists drew up a list, simply a list of reforms. To make the system more representative